Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Serge, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to build a high-level marketplace application that can do single sign-on with HighLevel. That lets you get information about who the user that's logged into HighLevel is when they load your application, send it to your backend, merge that data with user authentication information from your backend so that you can drive customization and access control in your application. So let's get started. I have right here, I pulled up the announcements from the high-level engineering team that explains what the SSO feature is and the benefits and so on. But one thing they didn't do is any other type of documentation. And this is such an awesome feature that the developer community had been waiting for such a long time that I think it merits some explanation. So single sign-on means that an application that is integrating with a host application, in this case, your app integrating with HighLevel, does not have to implement authentication if it doesn't want to. Of course, in this case, I'm going to show you a template that I created that lets you either use HighLevel's authentication as is, or combine it with authentication in a user management database that you can add to the template in case you have external authentication already. So the template's going to let you pull information from HighLevel. I'll show you what information you get. But also, if you already have a user authentication database, and if you're doing, for example, billing on your own end outside of HighLevel, then you'll have a way to combine the two. To get started, I've gone ahead and created a basic application. It's only requesting read-only locations access. And this is a agency level application, just to keep things simple. So if you haven't created an application, go to marketplace.gohighlevel.com, sign up for a developer account, and it's free. And you're going to be able to start creating applications. So a couple of housekeeping items before we start. High-level applications use the OAuth 2.0 protocol, which means that to integrate with HighLevel, there's a few things that you have to do. If you're not familiar with the high-level OAuth 2.0 implementation, then the high-level developer documentation has some information about that. So you would go to developers.gohighlevel.com, click on documentation, API 2.0 docs, and go to the authorization article. And it's going to explain the OAuth 2.0 process as HighLevel implements it. If this is still a bit confusing, because there's a lot of information here, feel free to drop a comment down below and I'll record another video explaining it. So let's say you've gone ahead and created an application, you've added your redirect URL, you've created a client ID and client secret, and then you've generated a single sign-on key. This is what's new in this release. And by default, when you create an application, no SSO key will have been provisioned. You'll just click here, generate one. You'll get a pop-up that says, hey, this is your SSO key, copy it. Make sure you copy it and save it somewhere safe. This is a secret. You should not commit it to code versioning or any, like GitHub, for example. Treat it with care and do not share it. But also, you're only going to see it once. If you see here, it's redacted and I can only see the last 4 characters of it just so I can identify it. But there's no way for me to get the SSO key once I've generated it. Okay, so make sure you generate an SSO key, you copy it and save it in a safe place. Like a password manager is a great place to put it, and that you do not share it with anybody, right? Once you have all of that and you've saved your application, then you want to come down to the custom pages section. So what are custom pages? In HighLevel, when a location or an agency installs your application, and I'm already showing you what that looks like, you have the ability to add a custom page next to the overview of your application. So when someone's seeing your application inside of the marketplace in HighLevel, HighLevel is going to show them a bunch of information about your application: the title, description, the category that you picked, whether there's pricing information that's associated with it, the current version number, your company name as you gave it to the marketplace, the distribution type, and the type of app. In this case, this is a private app, which is great for building an application for your agency to use privately or for sharing with agencies outside of the HighLevel marketplace, so not publicly listed. Okay. And then you can also provide a rich text description, and HighLevel also shows the permissions or the scopes that your app requests. In this case, like I showed you before, I'm only requesting locations read-only access because it doesn't really matter for this demo. This would be the scopes or the permissions that your app needs to operate. With that, the first time you load this screen, you're going to see an empty page and you're going to have the ability to add a custom page. So I'm not going to add a new one because I've already added it. But once you click the button to add a custom page, you're going to see this pop up. You can provide a name for the custom page. You can provide a live URL. This is the URL that gets added or gets shown to users when they go into your application's details page. And you can also provide a testing URL. The testing URL is optional, but it's very useful for testing your application when running it locally, for example. The live URL is required, and it has to be an HTTPS URL. So it has to have an SSO certificate assigned to it. An easy way to get an SSO certificate for testing purposes is to use ngrok, which is what I'm using here. And ngrok is a command line tool that you can run like so. You call it like ngrok. HTTP is the protocol that we want to channel, and the port that our application is listening on locally. What this does is it'll provision an endpoint for your application on ngrok's cloud, assign an SSO certificate to it, and it'll tunnel the traffic that goes to that URL, which is in the cloud with HTTPS, to your local running application. So I'm going to run it again. So you see, and you saw it was kind of fast, but you saw that it said generating or connecting, something like that. And then it now says, hey, your application or your tunnel is provisioned at this URL, and we're forwarding traffic to localhost 3001 on your local computer. And to show you, let me see, did that open? Yes. So this is the application, the demo that I prepared. Notice the URL that I loaded was HTTP, so no HTTPS, HTTP localhost 3001. But then I can also click this URL generated by ngrok, and you can see traffic going through. And you can also see that this tunneled version of the application is hosted on a subdomain of ngrokfree.app. And it has SSO, an SSO certificate, and you can expect it. And you're going to see star.ngrokfree.app. This is a Let's Encrypt certificate, which is perfectly fine. And this is what I do for development purposes. Okay. So let's say you created your custom page. Once you do, the marketplace is going to show you the application. As long as you're logged into a HighLevel agency, it's going to show you what users will see when they go into your application details page. And if you notice here, I called my custom page local, and that's what shows up here. If I change local to GHL SSO demo and save, now the marketplace is going to refresh the application in a minute now. And now GHL SSO demo. So that title you give the custom page is what shows up in the UI. Now, how does this work? Well, HighLevel custom pages for marketplace apps use iframes to host your application. So this URL, you're giving HighLevel here, the live URL, and in this case, the testing URL, the local application, are being added as an iframe. And then that iframe is placed under this tab on the application's detail page. In web technologies, there is in software engineering in general, there's a very frequent technique that is used to make applications more modular and reusable. It's actually a family of techniques. It's called IPC, or inter-process communication. On the web, in modern browsers, each page, each tab in the browser, but then also each iframe runs as an isolated process. That is a security mechanism to keep untrusted code, like, for example, code that is running on an iframe on a domain that you don't control, but that you're adding because it adds value to your application. It keeps that code from interfering too much with your application. It keeps that code from accessing data and functionality in your application unless you grant it access explicitly. So in the web, the most common used inter-process communication technique is called the send post message API. I'm going to show you what that is here. Post message. So the post message API in web technology, in the web platform, is a way in which two frames, so a main tab and an iframe that is hosted in it, but also two tabs that are totally unrelated, to exchange information with each other. What HighLevel has done is they've implemented the post message API with some JavaScript code that I'm going to show you in the template in a minute, that lets your app send the message to the HighLevel main application and say, hey, HighLevel, I am so-and-so application, and I would like to know who the user is, what their agency ID is, and what their location that they're currently active on is, and what permissions they have, right? And then the HighLevel main application will respond with an encrypted session key. Your application sends that to your backend and then uses this SSO key to decrypt that session. And that session is going to contain information about all these things that I just mentioned. So, for example, this demo application that I created is super simplistic, really. All it does is it calls into the HighLevel main application. It gets a session key back, sends it to a backend service, which is running inside the same application, decrypts it, and then sends back a response with that information that is inside the session. So you'll get the user ID, the company ID, the role of the user, the type of user, if it's agency or location user, and then which permissions that user has associated. That's it. So really simple. Now, that is how this integration works at HighLevel. But why would you care about this? Well, let's say you have an application in which users are allowed access to some features if they are an agency user, or not allowed if they're a location user. Or you want to make sure that people pay for your application before they use it inside a HighLevel. So how do you do that with this integration? Well, one way would be you could check the role of the user to see if it's a user, like a regular user, or an admin. And you can also check the type of the user to see if the user is an agency user or a location user. And then you can make decisions based on that. You can either show them a different page, you can redirect the iframe, you can load a specific component if your application is built with a component-based framework, like Vue or React or Next or Angular. And then you can also check, hey, is the company ID, which is the agency ID, a known one? Do I have in my database of paying customers this company ID or this agency ID? And if I do, which pricing tier are they subscribed to, right? And for example, in my company, SSO, we have 3 pricing tiers, well, 4 because we have a free one. And depending on the pricing tier that you are paying for, you get access to a higher level of features. Some features are not even available in the lower plans, right? So it's really useful and it's really simple to implement. And the best thing is you don't have to worry about implementing authentication from scratch. HighLevel's giving you a ready-made solution. Okay, so now let's look at what the template looks like. I've created this template application. It includes an API with a basic front end. This is the page you're seeing, and some JavaScript that does the SSO integration thing, right? So let's first look at the template. So just a very basic static HTML page that imports a script, this index.mjs script. And all the script does is it imports the SSO code, which was graciously provided by the high-level development team. And then it waits for the page to load, gets the information about the user session from HighLevel, sending it through the backend. I'm replacing the user ID and the company ID because I didn't want to leak that, but then also hides the loading indicator and sets the inner HTML content for this element with an ID of txt user session, which is this paragraph that I've got here, this pre-formatted text. So what does the SSO do? Well, like I mentioned, the SSO integration code just sends a message to the parent window. So the window here is the iframe that your application is loaded in. Parent is the main high-level application. So we're sending a message with this message ID or key, and we're waiting for a response from HighLevel. Whenever we get a response from HighLevel, the payload in the data in that response contains a session key. We're taking that session key, sending it back to an API endpoint that I created over here, and the response is going to contain a JSON object with user information. When the application loads, or when the custom page loads, it's calling this get user info function, this one here, which is doing this little handshake with HighLevel, sending it to the backend. Now, in our backend, I've created a couple controllers. One controller for OAuth, and I'll showcase this one in another video, but this is the one that we care about today. This one is listening on API/SSO/GHL, and it expects to receive a x-sso-session header in the request, which if you notice here is what I'm passing. That session is the high-level encrypted session. I'm running a guard or a middleware in this request that takes that header, checks that a value was provided, decrypts it using the SSO key, sets it as the user value in the request, and then returns true to indicate that the request is okay to continue. And then I'm using this decorator for this user parameter to fish that user information out of the request. And then I'm not doing anything on my own end, so I'm only just keeping the high-level session information, but I've made it so that this decorator can receive a pipe, which is another type of middleware in this framework that I'm using, Nest.js. If you give it that pipe, then it'll take the user information out of the request, and then it'll run it through the user pipe, that middleware that you give it. And this is where you would implement a middleware that can take the high-level user session and then perform a lookup on a database or call an API where you have user information, merge it, and return it. So that's it. Well, in this controller, I'm checking, hey, do we have a user session? And if we don't, then launch an exception. If we do, then return. And then that ends up being the value that we're sending back in the response body here. So that's it. Really simple. Hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have questions or comments, let me know down below in the comments, and happy building.